Evening. He's in shirt sleeves. Why do I have to wear this IOP sweatshirt here? We're pleased to welcome Mayor Pete Buttigieg to campus this evening. We look forward to his conversation with Sara Burnett about his new book, Shortest Way Home, One Mayor's Challenge and a Model for America's Future. And it may be that they have a couple of minutes of conversation about other projects he's working on now. I don't know. Pete ran for mayor and got elected mayor of South Bend when he was 29. He's 37 now, and he's running for president of the United States. And the whole reason is, yeah, there you go. The whole reason is to fulfill his goal, which is to become an IOP fellow by the time he's 50. So you're on a good path here. The book will be, his new book will be on for sale in the hall, and he'll be signing copies of it after this program. As a reminder, the University of Chicago is a tax-exempt 501c3 organization. It does not support or oppose any candidate for political office. Next Tuesday evening, we have an all-star panel of journalists to discuss the first 2 years of the Trump administration. The panel will feature Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, Abby Phillip from CNN, Michael Smerconish will be the moderator, and Ed Henry from Fox News as well. You can find out more about all of our upcoming events on our website at politics.uchicago.edu. As always, we'll open the floor for questions, and as always, the first three will go to students. And as always, we admonish you that questions begin with a question mark. Please make sure that your phones are silent. The restrooms are downstairs. And now, oh, there you are. Here to formally introduce our speakers, or our speaker and moderator, is Claire Potter. Claire is a second-year student from New York City. She's studying history. During her time at the IOP, she has served as a Fellows Ambassador. She was the ambassador to former Congressman Tom Perriello, who almost became governor of Virginia. She is now an IOP House intern and a writer for The Gate. Please join me in welcoming Claire to the podium.
Thank you all for coming to this afternoon's event. The IOP is happy to welcome Mayor Pete Buttigieg, or as he tells his constituents in South Bend to call him, Mayor Pete. He graduated Harvard University, where he was involved with his university's Institute of Politics in 2004. He went on to study at Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship. After working in consulting for several years, he surprised his colleagues by moving back to his Rust Belt hometown of South Bend, which was named one of Newsweek's 10 dying American cities in 2011. The city struggled to recover after Studebaker, a once large automobile manufacturer, shut down in 1963. At only 29 years old, Buttigieg decided to run for public office and became mayor. In 2014, he took an unpaid leave of absence to go on a 7-month tour of Afghanistan as an intelligence officer in the Naval Reserve. As mayor, he has worked to reorient the conversation away from recreating South Bend's industrial past and towards embracing an innovative future. Now, the city is in the midst of an economic resurgence, and its population is growing after years of steady depletion. This January, Mayor Buttigieg announced an exploratory committee to run for president. If elected, he would be the first millennial in the White House, as well as the first openly gay president. Today, he will be joined by Sara Burnett, a political reporter for the Associated Press. Having previously worked for the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post, she is now based in Chicago, where she covers the Midwest and the 2020 elections. They will discuss his recently published book, The Shortest Way Home, One Mayor's Challenge and a Model for America's Future, as well as his vision for the Democratic Party and the country. Now, please join me in welcoming Sara Burnett and Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Happy to spend some time with you again, hearing about how things are going so far. So we are definitely going to talk about the book. I finished it last night. I have lots of things to talk to you about. I'm not sure we're going to get to all of them because we want to make sure there's time for you all to ask questions. But I want to start with an observation, which will end in a question, David. For anyone who follows your Twitter, you are, in fact, a very busy man. I think earlier this week you gave the budget address at South Bend in between trips to Iowa, and you're off to New Hampshire soon. Can you tell us how the first weekend in Iowa went and what that was like for you? I know it was not your first time campaigning in Iowa, but it was your first time as a possible presidential candidate.
Yeah, well, first of all, just a big thank you for the opportunity to be here. David Axelrod is somebody who commands so much respect that when you get an invitation to come to a place like this, you do it at the drop of a hat. But also, the IOP that I was part of in college was part of not just my political formation, but some of my most important friendships. So I'm delighted to see that this exists here in Chicago too. So to answer your question, you're not sure quite what to expect in Iowa after you announce a presidential exploratory committee, other than that your staff really begins managing your ego as much as possible. And so I got a lot of comments like, Mayor, don't be alarmed if there's 4 people at this first event. There's nothing wrong with having more reporters than voters at your first outing in Iowa. Don't be alarmed if that's what happens. So I think they were trying to get me ready for that. But in truth, it was great. We did a coffee house, we did a public library, we did a living room, a senior center, and each of the venues we were at had really healthy attendance. Partly, I'd like to believe, out of interest in what we're doing, but the other thing you sensed immediately is that Iowans take this special outsized role that they have very seriously, and it was reflected in the questions that I got. So in my briefing packets, there were a lot of stuff on some parochial neighborhood things, what's going on in this county, or issues that were regarded as very Iowa specific, like ethanol. I got there and there were questions about war and peace and the trajectory of the country, and I got one question about the role of grace and forgiveness in the future of our politics. Some really profound questions, and so it kept you on your toes. Mm-hmm. But it was also an indication, I think, that this will be a very robust and healthy process, especially as you have, what'll it be, 10, 12, 18, 20 more people go through this gate where Iowans really want to kind of reach out and kick the tires and get a sense of what these candidates or would-be candidates are like.
There's a website that I follow called Iowa Starting Line. They do a great job of tracking everything that's happening in Iowa. And they wrote a piece recently, observations on the first Iowa trip by all the different folks who are getting in. And the observation about you was that your opening statement was one of the shortest, but that you had some very robust Q&A. And I thought about that as I was reading your book, because you talked about the first race in which you were running for treasurer and going from chicken dinner to county fair to different places where you kind of were testing messages, and that it was as important to you to listen as it was to give your talk. And I'm wondering if that informed what you did there, and was there anything that you heard other than the things that you just said that surprised you about what folks were asking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think to do it right, retail politics is a conversation, not just an appearance, right? Because otherwise, somebody who comes to see you in a living room, if you're just going to talk at them, they could get that on television. Mm-hmm. So it's really your opportunity to understand what you're hearing and to decide whether the things you're hearing are things you want to echo or things you want to challenge, how they challenge what you already believe. And it is something I learned campaigning in my first unsuccessful statewide campaign in Indiana. Also, when I was first running for mayor, I used to get just one after another cup of coffee with anybody who needed to be consulted, or anybody who I thought might themselves believe they needed to be consulted, or really just anybody at all who would listen. And what I found was that the reports came back that the less I had talked, the more I heard that the meeting had gone well. Hopefully not an indication that they didn't like what I had to say, but more that when you're doing a lot of listening, people feel like they're connecting with you. And then in the course of that, I would learn a lot. And at the end of each meeting, I would say, who are 3 more people I should ask to coffee? And I knew I was getting somewhere when the names came to be people I'd already met. That's how I think you can map any human terrain. So obviously I can't have a cup of coffee with everybody in Iowa, but the more I'm able to take questions, take comments, and integrate them into what I have to say, the more we'll have a sense of how and why the things we do have to say will resonate. In terms of things that were surprising, I wasn't ready for the question about grace and forgiveness. That was interesting. And actually I think a very important one, because we have, one way or another, there's got to be a national healing that goes on. And whenever this presidency comes to an end and whatever comes next begins, we've got to heal these rifts. And at the same time, we can't do that by telling those who are on the other side that we believe that they were complicit in a crime, right? That's not a way that you can forge healing. And so we really need to find a way to find what is most human in people that we've disagreed with without pretending or papering over our values. The other thing that I noticed that was really interesting was the generational energy. So obviously, selfishly, as the youngest person in the conversation, I need for young voters to be very energized and activated, and we need to believe our assumption is right, that young voters will respond well to a young candidate. But the other thing we found is that voters who were of a different generation were maybe even more interested in generational change. People my parents' age who showed up.
Well, and you found that in your
same pattern
bids
when I was running in South
mayor
Bend.
Also,
yeah,
you had crosstabs that you were looking at going.
Right. Yeah.
Wow, look at that.
The polling came back when I was running for mayor, and the older the voter was, the more likely they were to say me being 29 was a positive factor. Made them more likely to want to vote for me. I don't know all the reasons for that, but I think it's a powerful and interesting pattern. And I think it means that a generational message is not just for people of one generation. In fact, if we get this right, it will look less like the generational conflict that characterized, say, 1968, and more like the intergenerational alliance that, at least in South Bend, is what I felt was going on at events like the March for Our Lives and the Women's March.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of South Bend, your book, Shortest Way Home, I had the pleasure of a month or so ago coming to South Bend and spending some time with you. And when I asked your team about coming to do an interview, they responded that what he likes to do, if possible, if you're okay with it, is to drive around South Bend and point things out to you. And as a reporter, I was like, great, like that, us alone in a car. I know you told me that usually you have a press person with you, but so there was a photographer with me, and the 3 of us got in your car and drove around. And a lot of what you showed me related to the message that you have about how Democrats, or really any politician, but Democrats in particular, and the need to win back the heartland and voters in these areas that they missed. So if you could, we don't have several hours to drive around and see all of South Bend, but for those of us for those in the room who have not had this opportunity, pretend like we're all getting into your Chevy and point out a couple of the things about South Bend and the things that you write about in this book that you think are a lesson for what you call a model for America's future.
Okay, yeah. All right, so we'll hop in my car at the County City Building, and one of the first things I'll do is I'll take you into the northwest side. I'll take you into the neighborhood where I lived when I was very little. And I'll show you a lot of houses that are often very modest. Many of them would sell for less than $50,000, but by and large, very well kept. In fact, the joke is that you'll see the grandma out front clipping the lawn with nail scissors, because people had a lot of pride in their homes, but then other homes that are in very rough shape right among them. And then you'll see a lot of homes missing, just a lot where a house used to be. And while it's a sad sight to see a lot where a house used to be, to us, it represents major progress, because what we saw when I took office was over 1,300 vacant and abandoned houses collapsing on those sites. And we took action to repair as many as we could repair and to remove the ones we had to remove. Now we're dealing with the future of those lots. But my point is our neighborhoods are in deep transformation that wouldn't have been possible without concerted local action. Then we'll drive south and I'll take you up Western Avenue and I'll show you a building that's about 1/5 of a mile long, 800,000 square feet. Possibly the only reason it's still there is it's so big that it was impossible to blow it up. It is the largest remaining piece of what was once many, many buildings that were part of Studebaker as it manufactured cars in our city. And it's a building that was, for the most part, quiet since 1963, but is now filling with tech companies and companies and industries that didn't even exist when the last Studebaker rolled off the line, as we work to bring that part of our city back to life. I'll take you up a street that I somewhat controversially led an initiative to change the streetscape so that instead of being, as we have in many of our American downtowns, a 4-lane, one-way highway that served to evacuate the downtown the moment you were in it, instead something that would actually lead to kind of an urban downtown street life, walkable, bikeable, comfortable, as part of an indication of what it took to bring our downtown back. Then we'll go up to my office and I'll point out the window 2 churches that you can see that are close to the office downtown, both about the same size. And if you look at it for a second, you ask yourself, why are there 2 identically proportioned Catholic churches 1 block away from each other in the heart of the city? And the answer is that 100 years ago, our downtown was so dense and so diverse that you had to have one for the Irish and one for the Polish. As a reminder that we were global before people were talking about globalization. And as a reminder of how much things have changed. Now they share one parish center. So maybe that gives you a bit of a flavor of our city. I think a lot of people know about Notre Dame and they assume that our city might be a tidy, homogeneous, white, prosperous college town. We're proud that we have 5 colleges and universities in the city, but we were really an auto town. We're characteristic of the industrial Midwest in a lot of ways. We are just this year, this was part of my budget address on Monday, celebrating the fact that we have just gotten north of $20,000 in personal per capita income in South Bend. And that our poverty rate is soon going to go, we think, below 25%. So that struggle has been real, but the numbers have been moving in the right direction. And life has been moving in the right direction in our city. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is to tell a story about economic transformation that would be a reply to the suggestion that the only way to our hearts in the industrial Midwest is resentment. That the only answer for the industrial Midwest is to turn back the clock and try to retrieve greatness from some impossible again. I don't believe in honest politics can ever revolve around the word again. And that was the premise of our campaign. It was a risk we took, saying that, look, it's not going to be like the old way, but that's okay. These things are not coming back, but we are, and here's how. And when voters were willing to take a chance on that and gave us a shot, we were able to deliver.
I want to jump ahead a little bit, keeping my eye on the time here, because your book, it talks a lot about South Bend and the South Bend experience, but also about your personal experiences going to Harvard, writing your essay about Bernie Sanders, and then getting a phone call from him many years later when the DNC chair race was on. We'll talk about that in a second.
Spoiler alert, it was not a phone call to thank me for the essay that I wrote.
Yeah. You probably don't need the book to tell you that. But one of the chapters that I found most interesting, because it's one that I feel like I've heard the least detail from you, even when you and I spoke about it, was your deployment in Afghanistan. And I should say that this has roots back to Iowa and South Bend, and this observation that you had when you were campaigning in Iowa for President Obama, that you were knocking on doors and all these people in these rural, predominantly low-income areas were either being deployed or had kids who were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that prompted you to get involved. So you joined the reserves and then were called up during your first term as mayor.
That's right.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Tell us a little bit about what you did there, and then I have a segment I want you to read. But,
okay. I was assigned to a unit that focused on dealing with the flows of funding to the insurgency. So on paper, in classic military fashion, I believe I was the ATFC CJIATF Alpha LNO. In practice, that meant a certain amount of time working with different units that were involved in that effort. But more than anything, it just meant driving. I was military Uber. So the commander of my unit, who was actually a civilian, a DEA agent, by protocol, in order for him to go outside the wire, there needed to be 2 long guns in the vehicle. And I was one of just a couple of rifle-qualified people from my unit who were in Kabul at the time. So for him to go anywhere, I had to either drive him or volunteer to help secure the convoy. So about 100 times, it was my job to just get either him or other people or some equipment to where they were going alive. And that was actually, obviously, maybe less substantive on paper than intelligence work related to counter-threat finance, but that was where I learned the most. Because, right. For one thing, as I was also still thinking as a mayor, so I'm looking through the windshield, and part of my brain is looking for signs of threats. The other part of my brain is looking at municipal services, right? That's what mayors see. And it was this great reminder of the importance of government. There were some potholes. There is a hole in the road to Bagram so big that a guy has set up an ice cream cart next to it because he knows you'll have to come to a complete stop in order to get there. But you see what basic things we take for granted, not just trash pickup and policing and clean water, but animal control. We have animal control in South Bend. To be honest, it's not a function I think about most days. But when you have to swerve around a pack of wild dogs in order to complete your mission, in the middle of the city, you realize what it means. Well, and you mentioned in the book, you described it as learning how to drive at war. And you said looking for threats, but you get real specific, and there's a moment where you say, you're looking to see, is the hand that's coming out a man's hand in, someone who's wearing a woman's dress. Right. And that this idea that you are looking for threats, and that after you return from home, you had to stop yourself from yelling to your mother, like, right. Clear right, or something like that. Yeah, we were pulling onto the toll road on our way to Chicago, actually. And I'm clear right? Mom's like, what? But then you do tell a story about that the day after you left Afghanistan, that 2 of the members of your unit were killed. Not my unit, but yeah, people there. And that then had an impact on your life, obviously, as it would, but this already very accomplished life, I would like for you to read here for us. Maybe start here and flip to the next page. This are a couple of paragraphs that I think are very well done. Oh, okay. I've never read this in public before. Okay. Looking back, I can see no reason that can be confected for why one person and not another should die at random on a routine mission. For a mind that can't come to rest around that question, the only way out is to construct a reason going forward. You resolve to build a life that is somehow worthy of emerging on the better side of luck's absurd equations, because you know that, by definition, your luck is something you don't deserve. Nothing that had happened during the deployment would justify the pattern by which I returned safely and some of the others did not. But I had the rest of my life to try to repay whatever debt I had incurred by coming back in one piece. It all might sound superstitious, but the search for justification was an inescapable imperative for me, and another element of propulsion for my work at home. Not that it would really be possible to ever feel like I had settled this account, but it was clear that I would have to work harder than ever to make myself useful after these reminders of the precariousness of existence, not just in war zones, but in general. If this loss had happened while I was still deployed, it might have propelled me to try even harder, perhaps dangerously so, to make gains for my vanishing unit. But my war was over. If I wanted somehow to earn the luck that had brought me home safe from Afghanistan, I would have to do it from home in South Bend. Thanks. And then in the next chapter, you explain that if you had not had that experience of that deployment, you may not have met your husband and come out in the newspaper, and all of that happening at the same time that then Governor Pence was signing off on, yes.
signing off on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, I think it was called. It was all called the RFRA at the time. So how did you decide that you were going to come out as gay in a newspaper column? And how did that go in your mind as at the same time Mike Pence is signing this legislation and you all are having to respond to that?
Yeah, so a little tricky. So I'd figured out that I needed to come out. I'd started telling friends, told my parents, and then realized I needed to tell everybody else, and I kind of wanted to do it all at once and get it out of the way. And there's a part of me that, I mean, straight people don't have to come out, so why should I? It was kind of my thinking. And I really hope we'll live in a world where 50 years from now, or hopefully sooner, somebody in my position goes to some rubber chicken dinner and my date's a dude and everybody realizes that that's what that is and they don't really care and life goes on. But I knew I was living in Indiana in 2015. I was up for re-election and it just didn't work that way in Indiana. And so I had to figure out how to tell everybody clearly, preferably once, and just say it. So I wrote an op-ed. The title I submitted was Why Coming Out Matters and Why It Shouldn't Have to. And in classic newspaper fashion, they lopped off the second half, so it's just Why Coming Out Matters.
I was going to say, I know you did not get that whole headline in a newspaper. So.
But what I learned was, I learned a lot about why it did matter. I mean, my personal motivation was I was ready to have a personal life, and you can't really secretly date when you're a mayor, so I had to just get it out there, and then I could start dating. But people reached out, students who were in a really tough personal place reached out to let me know it had made it a little easier for them. People I'd been deployed with, some of whom were in the same boat, some of whom I'd gone on missions with and had no idea, reached out. And so it helped me realize that there is an effect just of being out that makes it that much easier for the next person who comes along. So we did it, didn't know what to expect when the op-ed ran. Making a very long story short, I got reelected with 80%. So the moral of the story, I guess, was people around home either supported me or in that part of my life, or they didn't care. Either of which is great.
And the Mike Pence relationship.
Do we have to? Okay.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned in your book that you found him to be a gentle, affable man. During the time that you came to know him. Yeah. I'm curious if you have spoken with him since he became the vice president, and what, if anything, your relationship is now.
Yeah, I'd say our relationship has deteriorated. So, look, when you're a mayor, it's your job to work with anybody who can help your city. And I'm on my third Republican governor, and I prided myself on working well with each of them. But he was a little different. Super nice to your face. We worked together on a lot of economic projects. But he just believes this in my view, fanatical ideology that is kind of impervious to evidence. And it's manifested in several ways. I mean, he's also written that cigarettes don't kill. I don't know, he just holds these beliefs, which makes it all the more strange that he then decided to team up with somebody like Donald Trump, although I write about my views on why that probably happened. And so it was painful. It was just painful for our state. And a little background, if you didn't follow the blow-by-blow in this, around the time I was getting ready to come out, then Governor Pence launched a so-called Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It was a bill that basically said you can discriminate if you want to, as long as you remember to mention that religion was the reason why. It was a license to discriminate, and it made our state, just as I was getting South Bend to look like this forward-looking city, we were even talking about the Silicon Prairie, in our tech sector, and suddenly we looked like the most backward-looking place. And it just made my job harder. But the heartening thing was a coalition rose up, including not just Democrats, but Democratic and Republican mayors, business leaders. I mean, NASCAR weighed in and said, don't do this. And so that was what really turned the tide and compelled him to retreat. Yeah, we've not interacted since he became VP, and I'm guessing that's not going to happen.
So after the 2016 election, you and a lot of other Democrats had thoughts on what had gone wrong, what should happen to the future of the party, and you put yourself out there to be possibly chair of the DNC. And I want to have you read another section here because you talked about the party needing a fresh start. And I think that this section here, and you ultimately ended up withdrawing from consideration before the vote?
Yeah, more or less at the vote. But when it was clear
vote.
we didn't have
right.
we didn't have the vote.
So I'd like, I've handily written in my book for you to see it there.
Yeah, so basically the setup here is we've come to the moment of the vote, or a little before it. It's clear that we don't have the ability to do it. I don't want to prolong the afternoon by staying in the race, so I'm getting out. But they give me the podium one more time. Standing at the podium, I looked out at the faces of the Democratic National Committee, from famous elected officials to obscure party activists, cleared my throat, and explained that I was standing down. But before leaving the stage, there was one last chance to press for the ideas that had motivated me to run in the first place. I urged the next chair to lead a party that would look beyond Washington, engage a newer generation, and compete in regions like my Indiana home. I asserted one more time that politics was ultimately about impact on everyday life. Invoking my military reserve status, I sought, even in this process-heavy and insider-oriented environment, to call for renewed focus on the concrete impacts of political decisions rather than on horse races and palace intrigue. My life depends on the decisions that are made by elected officials, I reminded the hushed committee members. So does yours.
Thank you. I know I've heard you make a similar comment as you've been doing interviews for the presidential race. You talk about the Supreme Court and the decision on marriage that allowed you and Chasten to get married. You talk about climate change and the fact that you're actually going to be around yes, well, that's the plan anyway. And this idea of intergenerational justice. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, part of the way I think about it is I think a lot about what the world looks like in 2054. So that's the year that I reach the current age of the current president. And if, God willing, you're expecting to be here in 2054, then these questions aren't theoretical, they're personal. In the same way that if you've ever been deployed on the orders of a president, the powers of the presidency are not theoretical for you. You have a very personal understanding of what those decisions mean. And I think coming from a generation that, we were the school shooting generation. I was in high school when Columbine happened. The generation that provided most of the troops after 9/11. A generation that statistically runs the risk of being the first in modern history to be worse off economically than our parents if we don't change things. And the generation that's going to be on the business end of things like climate change and going to be picking up the pieces and literally paying the costs of that, not to mention paying the cost of recent tax policy and other choices that are being made in D.C. What it means to me is that the younger you are, the more you have at stake. And a lot of decisions right now are being made, I think, almost with an attitude like it's someone else's problem. In fact, at one point, the president said that. They were asking him something about the budget, and he literally said, "I won't be here." Great. But we will. So, do you regard this as something you have a stake at, or is it just all someone else's problem to you? And I think that is kind of where my account of why politics matters in terms of belonging close to the ground. And the fact that it's why I talk about my marriage existing by the grace of a single vote on the Supreme Court. It's why I talk about what it means when you get deployed. And I talk about healthcare and a lot of other issues as something that deserves to be talked about, not in terms of the up and down kind of parlor games of Washington and what often commands the most attention on cable, but just in terms of whether our lives go better or worse because this person instead of that person got elected. I think that's what politics is about. That's why I do politics. And I think it may be easier to see those connections when you're a mayor, because mayors, we eat what we cook, right? If I change something about how the trash gets picked up, that affects how my trash gets picked up. But we should have just as much immediacy in the national level, because I would say all politics is local, especially national politics.
You also mentioned there that you regret calling President Trump a name, something about a chicken hawk.
Draft dodging chicken hawk is the terminology I went with.
What is your approach going forward to, or currently?
Yeah, so
dealing with the president.
I don't regret that because it isn't true. No, but this is important. It's because like name calling was never my thing, but I got worked up, and I'm really mad about people who fake disabilities to avoid military service. So that's how I talked about it. And but then as I was reflecting on that, what I realized is that the real problem with leadership right now is that it is bringing out the worst not only in supporters but also opponents. And we're going to have some moral tests, especially on my side of the aisle, on how we can confront and defeat something without emulating it. How can we outdo this without trying to be it?
So how do you do that? Because, for example, Amy Klobuchar, who I would put in the same category as you in terms of, she's generally thought of as this Minnesota nice. He tweets at her about this blizzard that was happening when she was announcing, and that weather, clearly there's no climate change, something about that. And then she responds, she sort of uncharacteristically in my mind kind of responded, I'd like to see how your hair would hold up in a blizzard or something.
Yeah, I mean, look, all of us, I think anybody who likes debate and is a Democrat has at some point fantasized about the things you would say to Donald Trump on the debate stage, right? I could give you mine, but I won't. Okay. But the point is, the more we get into that mod, just yesterday I saw something praising somebody who's like, this person's figured out how to do this thing that infuriates Trump. Oh. When you're in that mode, that means, if you think about it, that he's the one you're trying to impress. And that's exactly the kind of dark magic of this administration, is that all the energy, positive and negative, gets sucked into this one place. I believe this election is not about him. It is about us. It's about you. It's about whether your life will get better or worse based on the character and the policies of the person in that office. And so when he does or says something wrong, it needs to be called out, it needs to be confronted. And then we need to get back to what actually matters most. Because, and again, this might be a generational perspective, but if our message is right, it is a message that will be as intelligible, as convincing, and as correct 20 years from now as it is today. And so when this presidency and this president has come and gone, we need to have ideas that matter and meet people where they are. And I would argue our failure to do that in some ways is part of the problem of which this presidency is a symptom, not a cause. And so we should be politicking and governing around him, not at him, as much as possible.
Okay. It's time to open it up to questions from the audience. Just a reminder, the first 3 questions we'd like to have from students, and you all can line up at the microphones. And remember, your questions are supposed to include a question.
Hi, my name is Adam. I'm a second year from Iowa City. So
oh, great. All right, I got to stay on your good side then.
Yes. And I was just wondering what you learned from South Bend that you think would prepare you to take back the Midwest for Democrats.
So it's a great question, because I think the Midwest needs to be, I think it's actually already become closer to the center of gravity of our politics, and our party needs to recognize that. I don't mean to run as or talk as a regional candidate. I mean, we need messages that reach everybody, but I think if something works in the Midwest, that's a very good sign for its broader appeal. I think authenticity is prized in the Midwest. I think people have a really good nose. This is also a generational quality, but it's definitely a regional quality. That if there's a whiff of pretense, we can tell. I think that that focus on results and reality. Also a sense of decency. I mean, it's something that's been really important to my ability to work, especially across the aisle, on anything that we really care about in South Bend. A belief that resentment is not the main formula for our part of the country. So I hope that, I think that's something our region has to offer. I mean, I feel like our part of the country went very quickly from being ignored before 2016 to now being studied with exotic fascination, right, by political reporters. They show up, they look for the most rustiest Rust Belt place they can. They take me to your dive bar, right? Like
diner, your diner.
So let's take advantage of that and allow the best of being a Midwest. And part of the book is about, growing up, having come to believe that message that success meant getting out of here. And realizing as soon as I did that I was actually from somewhere in particular, that it mattered, that I was the product of a culture and that I ought to go home.
is Charlie. I'm a third year in the college, and my question is in regards to legislation on gun control and gun safety. I'm from South Florida, and I am wondering if you can make a promise that in your first 100 days that you will pass universal background checks and a ban to bump stocks.
I can promise that I'll put that forward because first of all, this is a great example of how warped the American political debate is. Most Americans are already there. In fact, on universal background checks, we're talking 80 or 90%. We're talking most gun owners, we're talking most Republicans, but for some weird reason, not most members of Congress. That is an indication not only of the issue itself, but what's wrong with our politics, right? That something can be that well understood across the aisle in America, and Congress can't deliver. And I think that it's actually something that brings a lot of us together. Yes, look, as a mayor, I get the call when somebody is shot in our city. And it's easily the worst part of the job. And I'm under no illusion that bump stocks and UBCs alone will fix gun violence in America, but it can't hurt. And I haven't heard a lot of good reasons why we shouldn't do it. That's something that I believe in and something I'll push for.
Thank you.
Hi again. I'm Dylan from New Mexico. I'm a third year in the college. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience in management consulting and what you sort of learned about the ability of the private sector to affect change in America. Chicago is a place where a lot of people get caught up and go directly to management consulting, and I'm just curious to get your thoughts on sort of how that all works.
Yeah, so I went to McKinsey, lived in Chicago, worked in their Chicago office, and in many ways it delivered on my hopes for that job, which was education. It was the biggest thing missing in my education was understanding how things actually worked concretely. And I worked in some really unsexy stuff like grocery pricing. But actually it wound up being very formative because that was when I learned about data in a very serious way because I was doing math for a living. I worked on energy and a lot of other areas and learned about, there are some things about the private sector that I really wish I could just copy paste into the public sector. And sometimes I have. For example, the sense that there's just such common purpose in most private sector organizations. I mean, there's a number on a page, and if it goes up, you're doing well, and if it goes down, you're not. So you get right to the mechanisms and the question of how we just do this thing we're doing better. There are times when there's just a sense of let's try this, let's try that, let's try whatever works until something hits. That I think we would do well to have more of in the public sector. On the other hand, the public sector is different, right? The private sector works largely based on the expectation that many private sector organizations will fail. For us, when we're responsible for, like delivering clean, safe drinking water that doesn't poison your family, right? I get to fail at that exactly 0 times. And it doesn't work like the private sector where, the cities that poison their people go out of business and the other ones thrive. Like you have a moral responsibility to take care of everybody. And so it does put different constraints on your work. Eventually pretty quickly I realized that client service was not for me. But I'm glad I did it. I learned a lot. And I think the one thing I would caution people who are making career choices to think about, first of all, don't underestimate how precious your 20s are. A couple years worth of your 20s is a pretty special thing, and you get to use it to find out who you are. And the other thing that you should think about is not only what you want, but what you want to want, because you very quickly take on the values of the organization you join. And so within a year, as somebody who cared mostly about literature and public service, on the plane, like every management consultant, I'm leafing through Sky Mall, and pretty soon I'm really interested in this kind of suburban lifestyle that actually was not what I had wanted to want before. So just think about the fact that you're actually still molding your preferences when you're coming out of college or even grad school. And think about organizations that you think will shape your preferences in a way that will help build you up as a person.
Hi, Mayor Pete. My name is Matt Enlow. I'm a recent alum of the law school, and I don't know if you remember, but we actually met in 2017 when you were last here. I really enjoyed that event. I enjoyed this one as well. You spoke a little bit about something that I want to ask you about. You talked about intergenerational justice.
Yes.
So as a fellow millennial, I'm concerned that many policies at the forefront of party politics, especially from Republicans, but yes, even from Democrats, are not designed to ensure that my future children, much less grandchildren, will have a safe, happy, and healthy life. What policies are you most passionate about that would achieve a better future for those who come after us?
So I think climate remains Exhibit A. I think it's not for nothing that the conversation about climate and the Green New Deal proposal came from a member of Congress who's even younger than I am. And I think what's really important about that proposal is it treats climate like the emergency that it is. I believe that it is on par in its destructive power. Climate crisis is on par with the Great Depression or a world war in terms of what it could do if we don't get ahead of it. The difference is we see it coming. So shame on us if we don't do something of equal kind of intensity to deal with it. Now, Green New Deal is more a set of goals, right now than it is a fully thought through plan, right? But it's an example, I think, of the kind of policies we would be making if we really treated the future as our problem and not someone else's. There are other things we should do around fiscal sustainability as well as environmental sustainability. There are measures that we need to take. I mean, things like common sense gun policy to keep people safe. And needless to say, education. Because we're getting ready for a period where the future of work is changing profoundly. Our generation will change professions more often than my parents' generation changed jobs. And that has much deeper implications than just how do you get somebody retrained and into a new gig. That really leads to some changes in how our society itself is organized. And there's some very exciting possibilities about how we fill that community purpose and identity that you used to get from spending 40 years at one employer. But if we fail to fill that void, something else will, and it may not be pretty.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Izzy. I'm a first-year student at the School of Public Policy, Harris School here. And yesterday I attended an event with the Institute of Politics with Senator Claire McCaskill and Senator Sherrod Brown Skyped in to join. And kind of the thesis of the event is that the way for the Democrats to move forward, especially in the Midwest or the 5 states that Senator McCaskill was highlighting, is moderating on some of the more passionate, progressive agenda items, especially. She was kind of pointing to ideas of the Green New Deal or ideas of Medicare for all, something like that. And as a politician from the Midwest and currently thinking about being president, I guess, what's your thought on that thesis? And do you think that moderation is really the answer that's needed? Thank you.
Thanks. So I agree with the premise that it's very important to connect with independents and even people across the aisle, and that as important as that is nationally, it's particularly important in the middle of the country. I don't agree that the way to do that necessarily has to do with ideological centrism. That was kind of the great insight of politics in the 90s, I think. But I'm not sure it works that way now. Think about how many voters had their choices narrowed down to Bernie Sanders, who's about as far as you can get ideologically, or Donald Trump, who doesn't even have an ideology, right? Just a style, and nothing in between. So, by the way, also in my own experience, it was very important to me to work well with Republicans. I was very proud of the fact that I got a lot of Republican and independent support. I didn't get it by pretending to be more conservative than I am. I got it by focusing on results and delivering, and also sometimes by actually being really straightforward about my values, knowing that somebody with different values might not decide I agreed with them, but might give me the benefit of the doubt anyway, knowing that whatever it was I was saying, came by it honestly. I would actually argue that in America in the last 40 to 50 years, the right has done a much better job of tethering its philosophies and values to its policies than the left has. Because by the 90s, we realized, well, what we really need to do is look at their policies, move from our policies, and kind of go to the middle. And then we had another tug of war, a reaction against that said, no, we need to look at their policies and go as far as possible. And the problem is that that entire conversation was keying off their policies instead of our philosophies. So they're getting their policies from their philosophies. We're getting our policies from a debate over how much to imitate or reject their policies. And what was missing was the connective tissue between our values and our policies. The reason this is coming up a lot now is, and I'm noticing this now as a figure in the 2020 conversation, is journalists and even voters really try to nail you down on the policies right away in order to understand who you are. And I'm a policy guy. It's something I care about a lot. But I'm trying to be on guard not to leap right to the 14-point plan, not to go right to the binder and the PowerPoint, because I want to make sure the first conversation is about values, which to me have to do with freedom, democracy, and security. That's my kind of bumper sticker approach. And we can unpack each one of those and talk about what they mean politically. But I think we really need to get back into talking about values. And I actually think that can be compelling to independents just as much as trying to triangulate some tidy ideological average.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Hi. Oh, sorry. My name's Devin. I'm a first year in the college, and I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I've really appreciated a lot of the interviews I've read from you and this one, and I think you've said a lot that's very insightful and nuanced about America and your vision and how to lead America. But one facet of the presidency is that it is also the leader of the free world. Yeah. So I was curious, what is your vision for America's role in the world, specifically through how your foreign policy would differ from the current and previous administrations?
Yeah, so right now the US doesn't have a foreign policy. And maybe that's a little bit, from a tactical standpoint, it's a little bit healthy for us, because again, a few years ago, all we knew about our foreign policy on the left was that we didn't want to do what they were doing on the right, even though the right weirdly had appropriated some of the policies from the left as the neoconservatives began to get interested in international involvement, pushed us into almost becoming isolationists, which I don't think is who we are. In my view, you need, first of all, when we're talking about anything related to military involvement, it does have to be very strictly tied to American interests, life or death American interests impacting the homeland. Otherwise, you just don't go. For example, it may be US policy that we would like to see regime change in Venezuela, in Iran, you name it. But it doesn't follow that we're going to commit troops to go make that happen. But tethered to American interests is American values. And I don't believe America is much if we're not also defending our values. And with every other tool in our toolkit, from diplomacy to aid, we need to make sure that we are making choices that redound to the benefit of values like democracy and freedom. We can't, look, there are some people, some dictatorships that we're going to have to unfriend if we want to keep our reputation. And if we want to remain a leader. And the third thing I would add to that is that the engagement of international institutions matters. I think everybody gets that many of our international institutions need reform or repair. But it's also the case that we need to be leading that process too. And we can either resent the rest of the world or we can lead it. We can't do both. And leading it means sometimes shouldering some burdens for others too. That's okay. As a matter of fact, that's what is expected of the strongest person in the room. And if we want to be regarded as strong, if we want to be regarded as great, then I think American greatness largely consists in that, not in an America First doctrine, which really means America only. Thanks.
Mayor Pete, my name is Vikram. I'm a fourth year in the college. We met earlier.
Yes.
So I was wondering, you said you had to work with 3 Republican governors, Mitch Daniels, Mike Pence, Eric Holcomb. What were some particularly tough compromises that you've had to make as being a Democratic mayor in a heavily Republican state, especially working with the governors?
Well, basically what you do is you look for the areas where you actually do have something in common. So one thing that was politically tough, because my party didn't want me to do it, was I provided cover for Republican legislators when they did the right thing on the gas tax. I'm a mayor. I worry a lot about potholes and paving. We don't have enough road funding. They were willing to adjust the gas tax so that we could get more, and I had their back. And we did a big event with the current Republican governor. I invited him up. They handed out big cardboard checks to all the local mayors because I wanted them to get a political reward for doing the right thing. Now I'm a little bit upset because the funding didn't come in quite as strong as I expected, and so we'll be talking about that in Indianapolis pretty soon. But the point is, I had to, that was not the message that was coming from our party, which wanted to take advantage at the moment, actually, and beat them up for raising taxes. But they did the right thing, and I wanted to have their back. The hard reality of living in a super minority state is there actually wasn't a lot of compromise because they didn't really need Democrats for anything. There's so many Republicans in the House and Senate that it didn't matter what the Democrats think. So we could only work on areas where we believed in the same thing. But another example coming up right now where, again, I will unreservedly praise the work of a Republican governor and legislature, is if they finally make Indiana no longer one of the 5 last states not to have a hate crime law. The governor's come out to say and do the right thing, and I got to have his back on that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name's Ian. I'm a 3rd year in the college. One of the things that's really excited me about your campaign so far is your focus on climate. I think it's you've made it a priority in a way some of the other candidates haven't. And I'm wondering what you think are kind of the most important policy priorities in terms of climate that we need to be addressing in the immediate future.
Yeah, so I think a lot of these have been put on the table, whether it's the kind of broad strokes of the Green New Deal resolution or just things that we know about moving off of fossil fuel dependence. Let me add a couple things that maybe aren't in the conversation as much. One, we really need to think about what we are incentivizing in the way our cities develop, because the patterns of urban growth really will help decide how sustainable our cities and therefore our country will be. And that means making sure we have the right level of density, making sure that we make it easier to have things like distributed power. I'm geeking out a little bit, but these are some things that really matter. Another thing I want to mention that I think would be an exciting twist on the conversation about U.S. energy independence is figuring out how many houses we can get to be basically personal energy independence, family energy independence. So instead of just saying we want the U.S. to be energy independent, how much do we have to bend the cost curve on solar through R&D investments that will probably have to come federally, so that we could get to the point where affordably Uncle Sam could send you a kit, and if you're a homeowner, this solar kit means that you're pretty much self-sufficient. I mean, we're already building in partnership with Habitat for Humanity homes in South Bend right now. They have these things on the roof. They look like stickers to me. But the point is that solar PV has almost reached the point where this pencils out, economically. And that house will be a net zero house. Figuring out how to do that is not only beneficial from a carbon perspective, but it's also empowering for families in low-income communities like ours, where a disproportionately high amount of your family budget goes to power, when you could be generating your own power, maybe even selling it back to the grid. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Miles. I'm a 2nd year in the college, and I'm from New York. From the Google and Facebook hearings, it's clear that many of our policymakers are relatively technology illiterate, and I wanted to know some of your thoughts on today's technology. So, like, how will current day technologies such as AI or self-driving cars affect the policies that you make?
Yeah, it's hugely important, and it's really embarrassing to watch legislators who don't appear to know what they're regulating, right? Especially at a moment when we really need government to be at least as sophisticated as the tech companies, so that we can have policies that compel them to do the right thing. AI is only going to accelerate. I'm chairing a task force of mayors right now dealing with this because it changes the way our cities work. One big thing I think we got to pay attention to is the extent to which we might inadvertently be automating bias. I'll give you a very simple example. You ever been on Gmail and it proposes a reply that's exactly what you would have said, and like that's kind of spooky, but that's AI at work, right? Mm-hmm. If you go to Google Translate and you enter the phrase, she is a doctor, he is a nurse, and you translate it into Turkish, which has no gender pronouns. Then you paste that in another window in Turkish and you translate it back into English. It comes back to you as he is a doctor, she is a nurse. Not because there was some sexist programmer at Google Translate trying to make sure that only men could be doctors, but because it's inhaling the biases of the world around it. That's what AI does, right? It's only as good or bad as what it picks up on. So we need to really think about the extent to which it can reinforce versus break down inequality. As I said, I think AI is also going to change the future of work, and it's going to change what's important in our readiness for the workforce. The other thing I would add is that we really need to think about what a data law and a data policy looks like for the US, because it's only going to increase to the point, arguably, where for most of us, the most valuable thing a person owns might be a home followed by a car. It might be that the body of data you own about yourself now is soon going to rise to the level where it goes somewhere in between car and home and only goes up. So who actually owns it? In Estonia right now, and that's a different case. They only have 1 million people there, but it's a very interesting one. You have all the rights to your data. Your data is backed up to the blockchain. If anybody accesses it, you have the ability to find out how and what they did. You can also do anything online in Estonia right now. You can vote. You can pay your tax. The only things you can't do are get married, and which makes sense. You still got to be in person for that, and certain real estate transactions. And they've created a digital society because they've created secure ID. Our ID could not be worse. I mean, first, think about this. Like, one of the basic jobs of government is authenticating, right? Establishing that you are who you say you are. And yet, how do you usually authenticate yourself? Sign in with Facebook, right? You can go to Banana Republic and you can sign in with Facebook. It's become Facebook's job to establish who we say we are. When we do authenticate ourselves in person, it's usually with a driver's license, even if you don't drive. And the closest thing we have to a national ID number breaks the most basic principle of internet security, which is never have your login username and your password be the same thing. So we've got to really rethink how our data is organized and how our participation in citizenship works technologically. And we're just at the very outset of understanding how to do that well.
Right, thank you.
Thanks.
We're going to take 2 more questions.
2 more, gosh.
Hi, my name's Maddie. I'm actually a senior out at Wheaton College in the suburbs.
Oh, terrific.
I'm curious what you think the way forward is for America in restoring international relationships after this administration, particularly in regards to Iran, seeing as we're having this weird conference in Poland right now that's about Iran, but it's not about Iran. And there's a lot of moderate and reformist sentiment in Iran that's rising,
right.
and they're going to be choosing a new supreme leader likely soon.
Right.
That's important to have a good relationship with them, I would think. And how do we repair what this administration has done?
So that's going to take a while, right? And I think the only way we can do it is to put our money where our mouth is. Every time we embarrass ourselves, somebody else is ready to take the prestige that we gave up. And right now, the people who are standing ready are less democratic than we are. For example, as we've withdrawn some of our international aid and soft power deployments, China has come in a hurry to supply that. The investments they're making in sub-Saharan Africa, and Afghanistan, I saw, are clearly an attempt to get not only favors owed, but just kind of sympathy and understanding. To me, it all comes back to American values. I truly believed when I was deployed overseas that as much as my body armor and my weapons, the other thing that kept me safe was that the flag that I was wearing represented a country that people thought kept its word. And that for every person who wanted to kill me and anybody in my vehicle, there were 10 who wished they were in America, and very few people in America wished it was the other way around. And if we lose that, I think everything else starts to fall apart. It also starts at home. We need to ourselves practice democracy and freedom in a meaningful way. Otherwise, it rings very hollow when we go around the world, if we even do it anymore, saying that we care about democracy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Celia. I'm a second year in college, and I'm a political science major. So my question is pertaining to reproductive rights and reproductive justice. When we talk about those concepts a lot in the United States, we talk about Roe versus Wade, which obviously is pertinent to what you were talking about earlier with the Supreme Court. But I actually want to talk a little bit about the Hyde Amendment. For those of you in here who are not familiar with the Hyde Amendment, it was enacted shortly after Roe versus Wade, and basically bans people who have their insurance through the federal government for using their insurance to pay for an abortion, which really targets poor people in this country and especially women of color from being able to access abortion. So my question for you is that were you to be elected president, would you commit to working with the Congress and your administration to overturn the Hyde Amendment and make sure that reproductive rights are really, truly accessible for everybody in this country?
So one of the most uncomfortable asterisks on Medicare for All is that if the Hyde Amendment is intact and we have Medicare for All, abortion's basically illegal. I don't think a lot of progressives have thought that through. I'm not sure I know all of the pathways, policy-wise, to resolve that contradiction that I don't think a lot of people in my party have thought through. What I will say is, philosophically, my view on this issue is that a woman, and I'm from Indiana, I've got a lot of supporters, friends, donors, who view this issue differently than I do. But the way I view it is that this is an incredibly difficult decision between a woman and her doctor. And a male politician like me has nothing to offer in that decision. And my policy views and my legislative priorities will follow suit.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. I have to acknowledge, since we're wrapping up, that I just caught the eye of some people who I've served with in the military who I haven't seen in a long time. I've been reunited. Would you guys mind just standing up so we can thank you for, because a lot of them are still in the military. Nobody's allowed to ask them any questions about me.
That seems like a great way to wrap up what has been a great conversation. So thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for your questions, and thank you for coming.
Thanks.